things they're doing with generative AI in relation to Canvas and some of their other products. So I have the privilege of introducing Ryan Lufkin, Vice President of Global Academic Strategy at Instructure, where he works to enhance the academic experience for educators and learners worldwide. With over 2 decades in the edtech world, Ryan has experience with every major technology platform that institutions use to deliver education, from the LMS to the SIS and all the systems in between. A well-known thought leader in the edtech industry, Ryan is a podcast co-host, frequent media spokesperson, and speaker at industry conferences and webinars. So with that, Ryan, I'm going to remove myself from the stage and take it away.
Thanks, Bart. Appreciate it. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll dive right into it. Let's see. All right. We're going to talk about the generative AI revolution. And I think for most of you, I think this may not be new, but we're going to cover some slides. Like Bart said, my name is Ryan Lufkin, VP of Global Academic Strategy here at Instructure. I've been with Instructure for 6 years. I spent a lot of time over the last year and a half literally traveling the world, talking to schools about emerging technologies like AI. It's kind of sucked all the air out of the room in a lot of events like EDUCAUSE and things like that. But I also work closely with Zach Pendleton, who's our chief architect here at Instructure, who really has been leading our AI implementation. And so I'm going to cover a little bit of background and some of our thinking around AI before I jump into probably what many of you are looking for, which is the features that will be coming out very soon and our thinking behind those. So last year at InstructureCon, we rolled out our principles around AI: intentional, safe, and equitable. And the reason that was really important for us is because, we wanted to make sure we were focused on solving human-driven problems, that intentional approach. So educator efficiency, really saving educators time, educators efficacy, helping them do the things they want to do, but do them more efficiently, and then student success. And you'll see a lot of those as we talk about the different features that are coming out. They're really focused in this area. And that's something that, I think we've seen over the last year and a half is there's a lot of AI players in the market right now that are kind of a hammer looking for a nail, and they're not exactly sure what they want to be. There's also some really great players that we've partnered with that we can talk about a little bit more. And again, like, I don't know if I said this at the beginning, but we're going to spend some time going through these. I'm going to move through some of my slides kind of quickly. I want to make sure we save time for some questions at the end. So if you have questions, put those in the chat and we'll try to get those to the end. Or if they're super timely, Bart will interrupt me and we can answer those as well. But the safe aspect, positive intent, clear privacy and security boundaries, really making sure that these AI tools, we don't break down the norms of what we built. We're going to talk a little bit about regulation as part of this. But one of the biggest challenges we face right now is building trust with educators, with admins, with users in general, right? When AI came out, the initial response was that it was a cheating tool. The focus has remained largely on academic integrity, and we need to make sure that we are addressing those concerns, but then moving productively forward. And then equitable and inclusive digital ecosystem, that equitable piece. One of the things that's so interesting is, this is an incredibly powerful technology, but we're already seeing, paid versions of these AI tools versus free versions. And, cost, we're going to talk a little bit about cost as well in a couple of different areas. But cost is one of those, the cost of implementing generative AI tools at scale is one of the things that came out maybe a little later in the discussion, and is something that we've seen is actually delayed some development, to be honest, just because it can be costly. So talk a little bit more about that. Again, when we talk about this, there's 30 years of edtech. There really have been 4 phases, and we're really talking about AI as a new phase, right? The internet fundamentally changed education technology. Learning objects and open educational resources, right? The idea that we could share these teaching tools to help scale, our educators' time was incredible. The first LMS systems released, right, which really created that digital classroom experience. LTI standards, so that created a level of openness and interoperability. You could argue right around that same time, the launch of SaaS solutions really made it scalable for products like Canvas on the market. And really now with the launch of generative AI, we've seen that next phase. And it's been year and a half about since the launch of the product. November 30th is my birthday, so I can always remember exactly when Generative AI launched. But what's incredible about it is when you talk about how quickly technologies were able to hit milestones like 100 million users. It took products like Google years to hit 100 million users. It took OpenAI months. Actually, it took them weeks. And so the level of adoption around OpenAI tools has been incredibly fast. And that just as we came out of COVID, just as we kind of thought we were returning to the new normal, we were hit with this. And I think that's where some of that change exhaustion came into play. And now I think we're coming a year into it. We're coming into a process where, we have some time to think about this. One of the challenges with large language models is that they're a bit of a black box. Even people that are well versed in the large language model world don't even truly understand how some of the outputs come, and that's where you get things like hallucinations and confidently wrong answers and things like that. And so there's a lot to be understood about these large language models that are powering these AI tools. They're different to what they reason with. They can give us really interesting results. They are closed source for the most part, and so it's interesting. There's the introduction of things like bias, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of that. But training and research it can be cost prohibitive, and that's why we've seen some even large players in the market be a little slower with how they roll out their large language models. We'll talk a little bit about that. But one of my favorite quotes is from Dr. Sasha Luciani, and she said, ChatGPT could be 3 raccoons in a trench coat, right? We don't know what's happening inside that black box, and that can lead us to a lot of concerns, especially in education where, we're built on evidence and building bibliographies and citing our sources. It can be a little hard to trust with this magical black box is giving us the answer we want. There's a lot of open questions still. How do we know the model's been trained on good data? We see bias right now. Even today, if you ask, some large language models, show me a picture of a CEO for an American company, it'll show you a white male, right? So the bias that slips in there based off of the data that they're trained on really can be a concern. Student data privacy, ongoing concern, probably one of the biggest concern, I think, right from the get-go with OpenAI. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But how would we make sure responses are respectful and true, right? The actual, a lot of the when Wikipedia really rose to prominence and students started citing it as sources, and it was banned as a source for a lot of cases because you had no real way of knowing whether the editors had made truthful updates to the Wikipedia pages. Things like that continue to be a concern. We need to make sure that our models are giving the right answers. And how do we inform themselves about these tools? How do we make sure that the technologies aren't just opaque to us so that we actually understand them better? And I love to use the Terminator logo and the War Games logo I used in another slide deck, because 1983 and 1984 were big years for conditioning us to fear AI, right? They were going to launch, we just wanted to play a chess game and they were going to launch the missiles, or, they came back from the future to kill us, right? Our generations have been scared of AI. And so when it actually comes to pass, we naturally kind of jump to the worst. One thing that's been interesting, and this is some Titan partner research that came out last year, and it's really compelling because if you look at the bottom, that kind of standard adoption curve, what we see is that faculty in purple there are much less far along the adoption curve than students are. And this is something that from my own experience, I've seen it in talking to educators, I've seen it in talking to my own children and students, but students are much more willing to jump in and play with the tools and just get to understand them. There's very little barrier to entry, and that's one of the reasons that generative AI became so positive so quickly, or became so ubiquitous so quickly, was the fact that those simple chat interfaces were so easy to deal with. But this finding at the top, AI users are more likely to have a positive outlook on the potential of generative AI tools on student learning if they're exposed and they've experimented with those AI tools. And so that's one of those things where when I talk to educators a lot, I say, go out and use it. Go out and use ChatGPT. Go out and use DALL-E. Go out and use some of the image generating tools. One of the things you find is the limitations, just how These AI tools, I think a lot of the headlines are they're going to replace artists, they're going to replace writers. When you actually use these tools, you start to understand that they're not as powerful, certainly at this point, as we experience them to be. I actually think they're much more for an artist. It's much more along the lines of Adobe Illustrator, but instead of using your hand to paintbrush to draw the images, you're using your words and your prompts that you engineer. And to get good results, it often takes hundreds of hours of prompt engineering, prompt writing to actually get the outputs that you want. There are some interesting developments with Sara, the new ChatGPT video. If those come out are as good as they show early on, it'll be impressive. But I still think the more you learn about these tools, the more likely you are to understand their shortcomings and to trust the use of them. So that's something I would say. There are opportunities and risks, and there's still a lot of a debate. Jared Stein, a good friend of mine, he used to work with me here at Instructure. He and I have ongoing debates about AI and whether or not we're embracing it too quickly or not. And frankly, I think it's one of those things where my opinion is that it'll be very ubiquitous in a very short period of time, and we gain nothing by ignoring it, right? These are relatively easy tools to engage with, to learn, and I'll talk a little bit about the guardrails around them here in a second. But I come down as an optimist around them. But we're going to talk a little bit about the opportunities and risks. AI has a lot of powerful things, right? These large language models are great translators. Zach Pendleton, our chief architect, he was learning Hungarian and he was using Google Translate and not having a lot of success. And he started using the large language models to translate and found that they were much more natural language. They were much more aligned with actual conversational language that his Czech counterparts were using. And he said, I was able to have my first productive conversation in a coffee shop because of those. So they're great at understanding language. They are essentially, and this is one of those when we fight the urge to anthropomorphize AI, we need to remember that these are essentially autocomplete to the nth degree. They're tools. They're not sentient. They don't have feelings. They're just trying to give us the answers we want. And when we understand that, we understand what they're good at and what maybe they're not so good at. But they can reduce cost of integration. They can reduce cost and time for going through large data sets. And frankly, they have made it so even non-developers can write code and do some basic coding, web building, things like that that we couldn't do before. Many integrations contain PII, so this is one of those areas that we need to be cautious of and make sure that we are not passing PII or any data back to an AI. And that also actually, I think, extends to educator IP as well. We've seen a number of cases where IP at companies was inadvertently transferred or put into an open AI model, and that there are things that those are no longer protectable once that code is ingested into an AI model. We need to make sure that we are creating those boundaries, and we need to actually trust AI providers or self-host. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those two options because they're incredibly important. I think a lot of institutions have started playing with self-hosting, and there are other institutions that have signed agreements with third parties, and there's advantages and disadvantages to both. We'll talk through here in a bit. Really, the goal of AI across the board, just like education technology in general, we've said for a long time that Canvas is not the superstar. The educator is the superstar. Canvas are some tools that make them more powerful, that extend their reach, enable engagement in ways. But the educators are entirely still the heart of the magic of education. They will remain that, and I think AI can offer assistance like extending the reach of a teacher. So when an educator can't be, it's the weekend, it's the evening, AI tools can be there to support students when educators can't. We've even seen educators taking their body of work, their content, training a large language model based off that, and creating virtual versions of themselves, right? And that's something I think we may see more in the future. But if if I'm working with Dr. Black and Dr. Black has created an AI version of themselves, realistically, that AI knows only what Dr. Black has trained them on and should not give false answers that Dr. Black wouldn't give because, frankly, there's some level of the same body of information. Obviously, Dr. Black has a lot more information than the AI would, but suitable stand-in some cases. The content that we provide is always the key. How do we train them? What do we expose an AI model to? Because that dictates what answers they get. That's one of the ways to avoid bias and to avoid wrong answers completely is by training it on a narrow set of data. And then the idea that we could actually start personalizing content in the course to best suit students and their knowledge, is a key component of the future. Probably beyond what we're doing right now, but we'll get there. So data residency and privacy continues to be one of the biggest challenges across the board. AI tools they're always trained on a set of data, but they don't have to ingest the data that they are being used. So you'll actually train the data model on a large data set. It's very proficient at providing answers in that, but you don't have to when a student interacts with it, when an educator interacts with it, you don't have to have that model continue to be trained by that. They don't always ingest the inputs, and that's really important. Not all models are available in all countries. This is an ongoing kind of issue, and we're seeing emerging regulations in the EU. We're seeing changing regulations in the US and Canada. And so that's one of the things too, is we choose our large language models and we understand where they're hosted. We need to make sure that we're making the right decisions. Tell you more about that in a second too. And then data storage terms are also not always advertised. This is something that's incredibly important. And we've seen some of our other players in the market make some questionable decisions around that. We'll talk about a little bit more. One of the things that we talk about a lot is and I'll give you a metaphor here in a second. But there's one of the things we hear is we need more regulation. We need more policies. We need more, and to some extent, yes, you need acceptable use policies. You need training for educators. But I'll show you a graphic in a second that I think underlines kind of our approach. We need to make sure that our agreements with our model providers protect that IP and the PII. And again, that as you work with Canvas, one of the interesting stories that I heard or conversations I had 2 weeks ago with our AI Advisory Council was, our institutions have a relationship of trust with Instructure, but they don't necessarily have a relationship of trust with the AI provider that we are licensing. And so we need to make sure that we are extending all of the same agreements and policies to that AI provider behind us, and have those acceptable use policies in place for as we implement these on campus. One of the things that we talk about though is we need to eat our vegetables, and Zach and I are, in fact, in 2 weeks at ASU GSV, I'm going to present a presentation around this card for the ingredients and for food and beverage, right? You look on the back of the food and beverage card, and it actually outlines everything that's in the food and where it came from, things like that. Realistically, we have all of the policies in place for student data protection, for student data privacy, for accessibility. What we need to do is make sure we eat our vegetables, make sure that these AI tools and these AI features that we roll out align with those existing policies. We don't need a myriad of new policies. We understand what we're trying to protect. We need to make sure that we align all of the aspects of our AI tools with those existing policies. We'll talk a little bit more about system accuracy. There's a lot of things that you can limit system accuracy, make systems more accurate by limiting what they're trained on. They're actually getting much better at not hallucinating, not providing those strange black box answers than they used to be. But that's one of the reasons that we, in many cases, have humans in the loop. We ask like, how do we make sure we don't have bias and that kind of stuff? We work with a couple of providers that are limiting to trusted databases, things like that, to make sure that they're staying on track. So some of the areas, in order to actually be accurate, an AI tool needs to understand the course materials. So if you've got an AI that is, trained on the larger internet, it may be providing answers that don't align with actual course materials, right? So as AI in a course, you need to make sure that you're focused on those course materials. It needs to have access to the course materials and needs to be structured properly to do that. One of the things that you'll see in a lot of the features that we're talking about, we've reduced the use of chat interface to reduce the risk of possible chat engineering, or prompt engineering, but also it just improves the outcomes when they are functioning on a relatively simple ask. Powerful tool doing a simple thing, great outcomes generally. And then a lot of times you'll hear us say human in the loop. This is something from the beginning. Some of the features that you'll see, they're awesome, but we would never trust them just on their own. We don't trust AI to make those decisions all on their own. There's always going to be a human in the loop review process as part of those, because we've seen that just leads to better outcomes. Access and equity, again, one of the things that came up probably after we had the initial splash around AI is that AI can be expensive. The training costs are huge. The data pass back on a hosted solution is very expensive. And you'll see that kind of impacting some of the decisions we've made as I talk about the features coming out. They're really good at foreign language translation. You need to make sure that they're all, whatever AI you're choosing, whatever large language model supports those, but they're really good at translation. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then, the supervision. How do you make sure that you're monitoring and course correcting these tools as they may develop bias, as they develop over time? A challenge we face. Model to price is decreasing. So there were some very powerful new recent large language models, a whole spate of new large language models that came out more recently that are optimized for less data transfer, so they're more affordable, they're more effective, they're actually in some ways more flexible for implementing. The more options around where they're hosted, and making sure that we're respecting the data residency requirements that we have. We're getting a lot more development around that right now. And then meta search and translations promising in step-by-step, multi-step pipelines. There's some more technical aspects of how these can be implemented, how many pathways you can actually implement on. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but ethics researchers need to continue to identify bias issues and discuss solutions, because that's an ongoing challenge. One of the things that came out earlier this year was Amazon's Bedrock, which is, Canvas is hosted on AWS. And so instead of looking at a cross-platform solution like some other providers, we were a little bit patient and waited for Amazon Bedrock to come out, which allows a choice of models, right? So you'll see a lot of our solutions are actually based off of Llama 2, some Mistral, but all those are all actually hosted with Amazon. The benefit of that is that we can actually use the AWS services. They're co-housed with Canvas, so we don't have to pay the price of transferring to a different data stack like Azure, and it gives us more options. And so this is something, we've been a little slower in rolling out some AI features, but there's reasoning behind it. And Amazon Bedrock, frankly, is one of those aspects that by being a little patient for our partner AWS to come to the table with Bedrock and their solutions, we're able to provide a better cost, more reliable, frankly, more trusted solution than some other providers in the market who decided to use Microsoft and made commitments to Azure, things like that. So we think we're doing the right approach there. Now, probably the part that most of you have been waiting for is what's coming in the near future. So these are what we call in the lab tools. I think if you've seen Zach Pendleton speak in the past, we talked about these 4 phases really at InstructureCon and our approach, how we were going to do that. So research is, us actually outlining what large language models we're going to use to power the tool, how we're going to host it, what's the expanse of that, rolling it into limited beta, so small groups. And then general beta is where we roll it out with a feature flag and let the vast majority of Canvas users, based off of geography and some other factors, that's how we actually roll it out to everybody. And then 4 is general release, where it's publicly available in the product. And one of the things that you'll see is, ultimately AI will be an underlying feature that powers everything, right? We're in the early phases of rolling these out, and so we're very focused on specific features. But you'll see some areas where we're actually laying the groundwork for that long-term use of AI, whether it's an AI that we choose or whether it's an AI that you as an institution choose. We're setting the groundwork for that as well. Right now, most of these features are pretty much all of these features, I will say, are in the 1 and 2. The research or the limited beta, I'm going to focus on the ones that are in limited beta because I want to make sure that you have access to those and can see those. Now, for those that may or may not know, InstructureCon is in July. There's always some interesting announcements at InstructureCon. You'll see a little bit more there. And to be honest, we had hoped we'd be a little further along with some of these features, but based on the decisions we made around hosting, around not rushing to market, and really making sure we were making the right decisions, we're a little slower than we wanted to be. But I think you'll see some really compelling features, and then you'll see more announcements at InstructureCon. So again, our AI strategy, making sure that we are ensuring scalability, maintainability, and cost for our customers. Focus on educator efficiency, like we said, sticking to those key parameters, avoiding bias, avoiding issues that would make us step back. Essentially, we want to make sure once we roll these tools out that we're moving forward. So what's interesting, like I said, there's kind of 3 levels. There's partner support. We've got a lot of LTI partners and API partners that are developing AI tools. So making sure we support them deeply. Workflow enhancements within the product itself, and then context and data, the deep down within the product. How are we supporting these at a base level? So one thing you will see in the very near future is smart search. I think previously you may have heard this referred to as semantic search, and this will be available throughout the product in most areas of the product. It's in beta right now, closed beta right now, but it will be moving forward in the very near future. You will see this certainly in release with feature flag at no additional cost in the next. Well, I'm being told early summer, so we're nearly there. And what's so interesting about this is if you've dealt with AI search, it's a much smarter search than the traditional keyword-based search option, right? It's smart enough to know if I search my course and say, hey, my professor said something about a guitar earlier this year, I can say, actually, it was a mandolin, and that was in the 2nd week, and here's the passage, right? So a much more impactful search feature. You may have actually seen this in the community where it was rolled out previously, but you'll see this in the very near future. Content translation. There are a couple aspects of this. Like I said, content translation is it's good at it, and it's good at a lot of different languages. You'll see this again, no additional charge. This will actually be used in a lot of different ways. One of the things that's been interesting about this feature is there's a lot of different use cases where you may be teaching a language and you don't want certain aspects of that translation to be enabled. So there's a lot of permissions and where is it turned on, where is it turned off that we've had to work through with this, because we don't want the ability necessarily for a student that's trying to learn Spanish just to turn it on and be able to read everything in Spanish. And so teachers have different scenarios. We want to make sure that we are supporting those different scenarios. So you'll see some interesting aspects of that. I will say too, there's one, within Canvas Studio, you'll see in the relatively near future, you'll see some interesting aspects around real-time captioning. And then once you've got real-time captioning, it's a simple step to real-time translation. So that's something we're excited about as well. We'll hear a little bit more about that in the future. Discussion summaries. These are for large courses. Discussion summaries can be incredibly cumbersome. Again, this is free in the product, will be free in the product, and should be a huge time saver for educators, students coming back to a discussion late, to catch up. But really, for educators that are trying to score and keep track of large discussions, should be a very compelling feature. Ask your data. So this is one that will probably be bundled into our analytics approach. Will not be free as part of Core Canvas, but we'll tell you a little bit more about that. But again, very much like the semantic search, where you can actually say, show me all the students with less than 70% grade and over 2 missing assignments, right? And it'll pull visualizations very quickly based off of that, right? Those without having actually any technical ability to create dashboards, you'll be able to create reports very quickly and get answers to your compelling questions. Again, there's exactly how this will be rolled out, but it probably will be a paid feature as associated with our analytics offerings. RCE integration. This is something that is in the very early beta stages, and is something that we know educators want. How do I make through simple chatbot create elements for the RCE? You'll see more about this. This one you will definitely see announced somewhere before InstructureCon. What you'll see essentially is at the end of this month, we'll start making announcements leading up to InstructureCon, highlighting all of these features as they are available. And we'll make these also available within the roadmap. There's been some updates. There's been some weirdness with the roadmap around different teams tracking things in Jira, our internal tools, and them being dropped off of the roadmap. We're working on that to make sure that all of these AI features are constantly updated on the roadmap. But that's in process. But you can always follow the roadmap. You can also visit the community site for AI that we archive a lot of this information on. Outcomes alignment, it will be, I think is in early beta right now. Again, should be early summer. But this saving educators time and building competency-based programs and developing outcome-aligned content. We'll make sure there's a broader demo around this that's really compelling. I actually don't have access to that right now, but this is one of those really time consuming tasks that is made much more simple with the use of AI. And then one of the aspects that we've been working on a lot, this is when I talk about the plumbing, the underlying, is really making sure that as we're not going to develop every tool that our institutions will want to use. So how do we make sure that we've built these broad extensions of the LTI, and for partners using the API? How do we make sure that these large language models are able to be plugged in and used more deeply and have access to the product more deeply? And so we've worked with some of our partners like Praxis, like Conmigo, like I think Noodle Factory and K16, folks like that, to actually make sure that we are empowering those tools as deeply into Canvas as possible. And you'll see a little bit more. Again, the more powerful we can make those features, the better we are. The other aspect of this, the other aspect of this too is we also want to make sure that we've built an architecture so that you as an institution, if you want to leverage your own large language models, which we see a lot of schools doing, you can actually plug those in very seamlessly and have access throughout Canvas without need to relying necessarily on our large language models. That's something, as we talk about openness and flexibility, that's something that we want to make sure that we continue to evolve. Conmigo is something we announced, and honestly, when we first announced Conmigo last year, it was far too expensive at scale. It was not something that we could have rolled out and made affordable for our schools. We've been working a great deal with Khan Academy, and we've done some amazing work on making this much more focused, making it much more affordable, And we're getting to the point where in the next couple of weeks, frankly, at this point, we're really working through some support questions. If they have support concerns, who manages those? So as two large companies work together, it's more about us going back and forth than actually rolling the tool out. Tool's ready to go. We're incredibly excited about what it'll be able to do. And you'll hear more about that in the very near future as soon as we get some of those issues resolved. But it took some work on our end and Khan Academy's end to make sure that we were creating a tool that basically was, within the scale of being affordable for all of our customers. So moving forward, we want to make sure that we're transparent in our discussions. We're facilitating discussions between our customers, our partners, and the providers of large language models. To this end, we have an AI advisory board that I actually run that's been incredibly helpful in providing feedback around that. We've got our CABs, where customer advisory boards on a quarterly basis, where we're getting information about that. And then we'll also be doing some events at InstructureCon that all of you can actually be involved, provide feedback. I know that we had an overwhelming request for people to be involved in the early betas, and we were not able to get even a small fraction of everybody that was interested into those betas. We'll be doing another round with product of organizing those beta programs and trying to get more schools, different schools, into those programs. So please don't think just because you haven't heard from us or that that your request went into the ether and was forgotten. We actually are looking at those constantly, and we'll be reaching out certainly as we get closer to InstructureCon and after. Again, that commitment to interoperability, the commitment to making sure that the trust relationship we have with our institutions extends to our partners, and then our solutions focus on solving real human education problems. That's where we are today.
Ryan, we have a couple of questions. I'm not sure. Oh, perfect transition. Yeah, we have about 7 minutes left, so a couple of questions came in here in chat. All the way back to when you were talking about search, there's a question about, is search in a single course, or is that across all of your courses?
Right now, it is in a single course, and you'll see it evolve over time because now we've actually, once it's in a course, it's much easier to be across all courses. And so you'll see it kind of a staged rollout with that, but right now it's within a single course.
Okay, great. The next question was around translations. How do you sanity check the results to make sure there's no hallucinations or they're accurate results when the translation feature?
One thing is we have not seen, and it's a great question because it's actually one of those that can be very hard with language. When you're trying to learn a language, you may not actually speak the language. Within the language translation piece, we haven't seen a lot of that hallucination. It doesn't seem to be as affected in translation as you see with some of the broader questions you ask it. That's not to say it doesn't exist, but what we'll do is as we're working with the beta teams, we continue to review that. Again, it's a little bit of a black box. So for the most part, we need to just actually be quality checking those, jumping in and taking a sample every once in a while and making sure that those are staying effective. But to be clear, this is new technology, and so some of that will provide feedback. We rely on feedback from our customers for best practices on how to make sure it's accurate from the get-go and stays accurate over time.
Great. So the next question is around the rich content editor. Will that integration be instructor only?
As opposed to instructional designer, or it won't be student facing. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think within the permissions aspect, anybody on the academic side of it will be able to use that. So instructional designers, admins. One thing you'll see right now is we're not doing a lot of student facing content. It's more susceptible to prompt misuse, and students like to break things. And frankly, we're really focused on the saving educators time right now. Over the course of the next year or so, you'll start seeing more personalized learning, right? More tools that will help focus on individual student journeys. But we're starting with the educator side because, frankly, it's the safer option.
Yeah, that personalization's always been there, even when it was just machine learning, right? That was the promise: exactly. How do you personalize things, right?
Yeah. And AI really does have the power to kind of understand the student, and again, in a way that is not exposing student data outside, but really understand the student, understand where their strengths and weaknesses are, and focus on supporting those weaknesses as part of that learning journey. So, I mean, that's one of the areas that I'm incredibly excited about when you look at competency-based education or some of the different approaches. AI opens doors to scalability that just were never possible before, and so we'll get there, but we've got to lay this groundwork first.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about Canvas maybe to get this question, but you may do you have a way to plug in LTI content into the course search?
Ooh, that one's a little too specific for me to answer. So I think what you're saying is if you've got an LTI app that is plugged into a course, will search extend to that content? I don't know, and it's a use case I can go try to figure out. So I'm actually in some meetings in Arizona right now. Zach Pendleton, who is not far away, so I'll actually go talk to him about that and see if I can't get some answers, and maybe I can provide that in the community.
Okay, great. It looks like one more question here. Many large language models have content restrictions to try to prevent things like hate speech, for example, that make them return hallucinations. Are there content area restrictions that will come up with these tools?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the interesting things about large language models is there's the large language model and how it's trained, and then there's the content it has access to when it is actually being put to use, right? So if you can actually restrict it to the content of a course, and it is an incredibly smart model because it's been trained on larger models, but the only data when it is providing answers is the data within a course. So the textbook, the supporting materials, all of those things will power the AI, and that's it. And so it limits its ability to create false answers positively or to hallucinate because it just doesn't have access to that much data. And that's something I think is really interesting. And it's something Zach Pendleton specifically has spent a lot of time kind of training in his lab. Like I always talk about Zach like he's a mad scientist, but it's true. And he's stood up a lot of these different large language models. He's looked at the ones that have different restrictions, different sizes, and I think the vision is at some point you'll have a large language model so hyper focused on an individual course that it's just running in the course. That's all it knows. That's the power, right? We'll have AI tools that follow students around and become their tutor throughout their journey, right? There's different aspects of this that we're really just starting to understand, and so one of the things we're really focused on is to, as much as we possibly can, limit the content that these tools have access to so that they're hyper focused on their task and they're less likely to have the downside. The bias, the hate speech, everything we can do is really focused on limiting that. And again, even when you search for a CEO, a North American CEO, I want it to show a woman and a man side by side. I want it to show people of diverse background. And then we've got to get to the point where because they're trained on huge amounts of data, and maybe that bias exists in that huge amount of data, somehow we're preventing that from being surfaced and making it a much more equitable approach.
Okay, we have one more question here. As you begin to roll out student-facing features, it will be important to allow instructors to turn off those features in their course for specific pedagogical reasons. Okay, so now I should have expanded that first. Not so much a question, but a statement.
No, it's spot on. Honestly, it's one of those things. The permission aspect of it is we want it to be down to the course level. We want it to be down to the actual faculty level. We know that sometimes when these features are turned on across an organization, it can cause issues. We want to make sure the educators are in control and they control how these tools are used in their classrooms. And so, spot on. I think that's a great statement. And it's something that is very much in line with our thinking.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate the time you spent with us today here at the summit, and also thank you, Instructure, for being a platinum sponsor. This recording will be available on the summit platform and then in the future on our YouTube channel. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your summit.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.